Good morning, guys. If you tried to get on earlier and weren't able to get on, I'm sorry. I was having a couple of connection issues, so I wasn't able to get on Zoom correctly, but it's working now, and I'll make sure I send this to all of you guys. Just a quick homework check. I have all of the homework up on the website for you guys to be able to go through. Just a reminder that it is due the week of the final, or not final, of the midterm. So that's not next week, but it's the week after. So make sure you get all of your homework to me by then. You can send it all at once, you can send it in spurts. I'm not picky. But if you haven't sent in a couple of weeks, make sure you get that in by not next week, but the week after, that week of the midterm. We'll also have a review next week to make sure that you feel comfortable and good about the midterm. So if you can't make it to the class next week, let me know, and we'll figure out a time for us to do a review. So first, homework from last week. Which food label did you look at? So you're supposed to look at a food label and figure out, does it have trans fats, what's the serving size? Make sure you take a look at those food labels. What did you notice about it? So all the list of things that I give you. Make sure you go through those, and even if you check multiple food labels so you know that if it's an updated one versus an older one. Like I said, the updated ones need to be out by July 28th, but that doesn't mean all of the old ones will be gone. They're still able to sell the old ones, but they need to have everything new needs to be updated by July 28th. Now, who did you explain a nutrition label to? If you didn't find someone to explain it to, you can always explain it to me. Just send me a message, and then we can do a web chat, or you can send something to me explaining the nutrition label and how to read it. And then, do you feel like if you explained it to someone, do you feel like you understand how to read a nutrition label? Do you understand how to read it? Do you understand how to explain it to somebody? And if you don't, let me know. Now, this week, we're going to talk about organic and nutrition claims. So last week we touched on it a little bit with the claims on the front of the box. We're going to go even deeper into what it actually means to be organic and the claims that are on the box. So what are some reasons to eat organic? These are going to be a little controversial because there is some evidence that it's worth eating organic and some evidence that it's not. And that's okay too. There is a theory that it decreases the body's toxic load, and all that means is there's less junk on organic foods. Now that can go either way, partly because there is no distance from a conventional or a farm that can use chemical fertilizers, artificial growth hormones, things like that, that there is no distance that they have to be from an organic farm. So it's not uncommon for things to blow over from a conventional farm to an organic farm. A lot of times they're owned by the same company. One company will have an organic portion and a conventional portion. So that's kind of hit or miss too. They may not have fewer pesticides than regular ones. There's really no testing for it. So it could go either way with decreasing the body's toxic load. Now, generally with animal products, that will be true because they have to be fed a different diet, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. There's a theory that it decreases the risk for chronic disease because of the decreased toxic load. So the less your body has to deal with, the less risk it's at for chronic diseases. They're more nutrient dense, and that's also under some debate. I actually want you to go in and this can be one of the topics that we do for your homework, whether organic foods are more nutrient dense or not. There's a theory that you can avoid contaminated animal products. Also kind of goes either way. Organic foods and organic animal products have to be kept away from certain items like sewage sludge. They can't be fed certain things. They can't be fed animals who aren't supposed to eat other animals, aren't supposed to be fed animals if they're organic. So you may be able to avoid contaminated products. For example, generally organic beef is from cows that are not fed corn. If you feed a cow corn, which it is not supposed to eat, it's only supposed to eat grass, then you have to take the corn out of its stomach, which opens it up to a lot of diseases. That's something to think about when you're looking at organic foods versus inorganic. It is not completely against the rules for organic cows to be fed corn, but generally they're not. Organic foods are more likely to be fresh, and really that's only because they go bad faster. If you're looking at, let's say, if you're looking at organic apples versus inorganic apples or conventional apples, the conventional apples can be up to a year old at the grocery store. There are certain preservatives that can be put on inorganic foods that can't be put on organic foods. Just for that reason, the organic foods are more likely to be fresher. They're more likely to be from that season. And supporting sustainable farming, that's also under some debate, and that can also be a topic that you look at for your homework. So you can support sustainable farming, but there is some debate if organic is actually more sustainable. Now you can look at that, do a little research, let me know what you find out. What does organic actually mean? So there are certain standards for growing, storing, processing, packaging, and shipping organic foods. So they can't have any chemically formulated fertilizers. And really that just means artificial fertilizers. There's some things they can use, and there's actually a very specific list of things they can use. They can't have any artificial ingredients, so nothing that didn't come basically from the ground. So for example, they can't use, for meat, they can't use artificial antibiotics. We'll talk about that later, but that's one example. So typically they'll use something like oregano or garlic, which are antibiotics, but they're plant-based antibiotics. They can't use any growth stimulants, so they can't try to make something grow faster. That'll happen a lot with conventional meats. If you look at, let's say, if you've seen a farm that has conventional chickens, you'll notice that the part of the chicken that you eat is a lot bigger on conventionally grown chickens than regular organic chickens. That's because they use growth stimulants. You can't do that with organic. So that normally means that organic products are going to be smaller than conventional. You can't use any antibiotics. So again, they're part of the artificial ingredients. So you can't use antibiotics. Most of the time, again, they'll use things like oregano or garlic to avoid the infections, or they'll use some other naturally derived way to avoid infection. This one's important. It can't come into contact with sewage sludge. Sewage sludge is gross, and it does get in your food. Organic means you can't have any sewage sludge come into contact with the animals or plants that are being considered organic. And then it can't have any, this is a hard one, because pesticide just means anything that keeps bugs away. You can use natural pesticides. You cannot use artificial pesticides. So a lot of people think that all pesticides are bad. That's not necessarily true. There are certain things like diatomaceous earth, other products that you can use to keep pests away that are allowed in an organic farm. They can use vinegars, they can use certain compounds made from seaweed. So you can use pesticides, but they can't be artificially derived pesticides. It's overseen by the USDA. The Organic Food Productions Act started in 1990. So the USDA really oversees this. Now, there are a lot of people that say they're organic. You have to have that USDA organic seal to really be considered organic. That's a lot of people for that entity to oversee. Now, you do get punished if they find out that you are not doing all of these things, but it's, for example, if you're doing something like this, number one, you have to file for it, which is about $5,000, which can be hard for a smaller farm to be able to label their things, their foods as organic. But it's also an $11,000 fine if they see anything wrong with it, and they tend to go back. You have to get approved for it, and then they go back every couple of years to make sure that you're following through. Now, $11,000 sounds like a really big deal, and it is for smaller farms. It's not for a bigger farm. $11,000 is really nothing, and you don't necessarily get that seal taken away. Now, it doesn't happen often, but it does. The last thing that it needs to make sure it has, which is very vague, which is another hard thing with organic, is that organic foods have to be produced in a way that protects natural resources, conserves biodiversity, and uses only approved substances. Now, the approved substances list is very specific. Protecting natural resources and conserving biodiversity isn't. Those two things are a little harder to track. They have a couple of rules with what that's supposed to mean, but it can be taken and interpreted different ways, as can a lot of the things above. So again, like the pesticides, you can use pesticides, they can't be artificial pesticides. So we have to figure out where that line is of artificial pesticides and natural pesticides, artificial antibiotics, natural antibiotics. So that's something we have a little bit of trouble with organic. Now, how do you become organic? Again, it is kind of expensive for smaller farms to do. It is $200 to $1,500 per item you want to name organic, plus the annual certification fee. So it ends up being about $5,000. Violations, so if you say you're doing any of those things that we talked about, but you're not, it can be up to $11,000. Again, that can be hard, because for bigger companies, that's really not a whole lot of money. But for smaller farms, it is. The processing also has to meet USDA standards. So it has to comply to certain rules from the time it's planted to the time it is picked. Now, small farms with less than $5,000 in gross income from organic sales are exempt. So they can label products as organic without the certification. Those are the only ones that are exempt. And small farms that are making $5,000 or less are normally going to be the ones you see once a month at the farmer's market. If they're only making that much and only bringing in that much, they're probably not doing a whole lot. It's not a big farm. So that's also something to look at. They're exempt, and it can be labeled as organic, but not USDA organic. So if you see something, we'll talk about one of the violations that you would pay $11,000 for is labeling your food organic without the USDA seal. Those are the farms that are exempt from that. So any of the farmers you see at the farmer's market who have their food labeled as organic, but not USDA organic, they're not necessarily doing anything wrong. They just make $5,000 or less in gross income from their organic sales. Personal care products, shampoo, makeup are not regulated by the FDA or by the USDA, but they are by the Food and Drug Administration, FDA. They do not regulate organic labeling. So personal care products can be labeled as organic, not USDA organic, and not get in trouble for it. So that's the big difference. USDA handles food, FDA handles personal care products, pharmaceutical drugs, supplements, things like that, and they are not regulated. Now, there are certain levels of organic that we're going to talk about. You can be 100% organic, which all of the ingredients on the list have to be certified organic. Any processing aids have to be organic. The label has to say the name of the certifying agent, which is normally a part of the USDA. Now, organic means it has 95% organic ingredients. Normally that extra ingredient is water. Water can't be organic. It's one of the things that can't. So if something's labeled as organic, very rarely is something with water going to be labeled as 100% organic. Sometimes it can be, but water inherently is not organic. And it can't be labeled by the USDA as organic. So normally it's labeled as organic, not 100% organic. Or made with organic ingredients means 70% or more of the ingredients are organic. Now, the USDA seal cannot be used on this package. It is not technically labeled as organic. Now, the 30% or less ingredients that, in addition to the 70% of organic ingredients, you can't have certain additives in them. So you can't have certain colors or certain artificial flavors or certain preservatives. things like that. They can't have those things in it. So it is still heavily regulated, but it can't be labeled exactly as organic. It's just made with organic ingredients. Now, there is a list of things that the Environmental Working Group, or the EWG, put out. It's called the Dirty Dozen, and it's been expanded on every year. They fix it yearly to see what foods you would want to eat organic. So which ones have more pesticides on them if they're conventional, which ones get sprayed more. And since our food comes from different parts of the world and different growers, they just try to do their best to see which ones you would typically want to eat organic every year. They'll put one out every year, every other year. So the first one is strawberries. And these are going to be the things that tend to have a lot of pesticides that you'll have a hard time getting off. So you'll see a lot of these things. You typically eat the skin. The big ones are things you eat the skin on, or leafy greens. Now, I want to get to eggs. So the EWG puts out the Dirty Dozen of fruits and vegetables. I added eggs, meat, butter, milk, and tea. Now, I added eggs, meat, and butter because remember how when we talked about the macronutrients, where do we store everything that goes into our body? In our fat. Eggs, meats, and butter are a lot of fat. So if you are getting things from animals that are eating a good diet, the things that are stored in their fat is going to be good. You're going to have those bright eggs that are full of vitamin A. They're going to have more omega-3s. They're just going to be better all around. You're going to have the better looking meat and the brighter colored butter. There are going to be better things stored in those fats. There are going to be fewer nasties and things that are going to build up in your system. That's what we talked when we talked about the toxic load. That's what we're looking at. So eggs, meats, and butter is another one that you may want to eat organic, especially the ones with higher fat content. Milk is another one. Milk tends to have a lot of fat too. There's also going to be less yuckies in milk, like pus or extra things that are added in the processing. Tea is another one. I added tea because it's concentrated. Tea and coffee. So when you have those, you have a concentrated form of them. Coffee is one of the most heavily laden pesticide products that we use on a regular basis. Tea is right about the same. Because we're concentrating those things, we're putting a whole lot of that in our system. So if you're not having organic, they're also heavily sprayed, and they're not necessarily cleaned off the way they should be. So that's another thing to watch for. Anything that's super concentrated, you probably want to eat organic. Now, which ones really don't matter? Avocados, sweet corn, pineapples, cabbage, anything you tend to take off the outside, frozen sweet peas. I'm not completely sure why they specified frozen. Maybe they get cleaned off better, I'm not sure, but they did specify frozen on the site. Onions, asparagus. Asparagus, I would have actually thought that that would have been sprayed more heavily. I guess since it's a winter vegetable, it's not as eaten up by bugs, so they don't have to use the pesticides. Mangoes, again, you take off the skin. Papayas, you don't eat the outside. Kiwi, eggplant, honeydew, grapefruit, cantaloupe, cauliflower. Most of those, you generally don't eat the outside. Now, what does not mean organic? See this label right here that says 100% natural? That does not mean organic. Now, natural, not organic, really means very little. Natural actually means just about nothing. Brand names with organic. So if you see something, normally companies won't do this anymore because there was a time that they were getting in trouble for it. But if you see, for example, HEB Organics, organic is part of the name. It doesn't have to be organic. Now, most of those are labeled as USDA organic as well. But even if it's not, it doesn't technically have to be organic. Free range, not organic. All free range means is that the chicken or the animal had space to move. It doesn't matter how much, it just has space to move. That is generally a good thing because typically free range will mean they have actual space to go graze? Not always. Cage-free also just means they're not in a cage. Normally with chickens, that means they're in this big warehouse, but because they're technically not in a cage, they can be labeled as cage-free. Most chickens are not kept in cages. They are packed into a warehouse. But since they are labeled as, or since they do that, they can be labeled as cage-free. Farm fresh or farm raised just means they're from a farm. All fruits and vegetables and animals come from a farm. Technically, if they're being raised there and then they're being sold as food, it's a farm. So that can be anything. It really doesn't mean a whole lot. Hormone-free cannot be used. That is an illegal claim. You cannot say hormone-free with animals because we make our own hormones. You have to have hormones to grow. You can say no hormones added or raised without hormones, but you cannot say hormone-free. If it does, they can get in trouble. Antibiotic-free, that is a hard one. Technically, you'll see it a lot these days because technically all of our meats are antibiotic-free because they have to go through a withdrawal period before. If they're given antibiotics, they have to go through a withdrawal period and a bunch of testing to make sure there are no antibiotics in their system. So all those commercials that you'll see for Subway and McDonald's and Tyson's that say antibiotic-free, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, of course they are because it's illegal to sell it with antibiotics still in the system. However, it can be raised without antibiotics or no antibiotics ever, and that means that product was never given antibiotics. It can be given different things, like we talked about the oregano. Sometimes they'll add that to their water to make sure that they're not getting sick. But if they are ever given antibiotics, it can no longer be labeled that way. However, most foods are already antibiotic-free. Certified Humane, Animal Welfare Approved, Food Alliance Certified, and American Humane Certified, not Human Certified. Those are all entities that look at the care of the animal. So it's looking, are the chickens given enough room to roam? Are the cows being given corn and then it has to be taken out of their stomach? Or are they able to just feed on grass? Are pigs being kept packed together or are they allowed room to live? So they're going to look at those factors when they're looking at farms. So if you see those, they're looking at different things based on the treatment of the animal. So sometimes you'll see it in a little tiny seal on the bottom of the package. Now, some of the claims you need to look out for. A health claim is a relationship between a food substance and the reduced risk of a disease or health-related condition. So that would be, let's say, this food helps treat osteoporosis. There are some things that can be said and some things that can't. The regulations that I put down, the 1990 Nutrition Labeling and Education Act and the 1997 Food and Drug Administration Modernization Act, they give you what is allowed to be said and what is not. So there are certain things that can't be said about certain foods, and there are certain nutrients that can be used that have proven effects so that their effects can be said on the label. Some of them cannot. So if you've ever seen, for example, on a supplement where it has a little asterisk and it says claim not approved by the FDA, that's why it says that, because it's not allowed to definitively say whatever it said. If there's not an asterisk, it is allowed to be said. Now there are nutrition content claims too, and that's a label that claims claim that characterizes the level of nutrition in a food. So it can say high in this, or low in sodium, high in protein. And we talked about those a little bit last week. So we talked about what can be said as low sodium, what can be said as reduced sodium, what is no trans fat, what counts as no sugar, and if it says no, what does it really mean? Less than 0.5 grams per serving. So that'll be a nutrition content claim. It's just talking about the level of nutrition in food and what's in it, and that'll be something on the front of the box. And then structure and function claims, it's how the role of the nutrient is intended to affect the structure and function of the human body, and those are regulated by the Dietary Supplement Act and Education Act of 1984. So, I also don't really care if you remember the acts that have to do with these. I just want you to remember what they do and which ones are allowed, which ones are not. Structure and function claims are going to be things like high in fiber, which can reduce cholesterol. Those are going to be the things that you're looking for. It's basically just telling you what that nutrient does in most people. That's another one that has to be, there's a list of nutrients they can use and a list of them they can't. Fiber is one that typically they will use. You'll see it on the front of things like Metamucil or high fiber items. Now, just to go over a couple things. What is one thing a nutrition label can say? So a nutrition label could say something like, going back, certain things can make a health claim. There can be the relationship between a food substance and reduced risk of a disease, or it can characterize the level of nutrition in food, or it can talk about the role of the nutrient on the body. What's one thing it cannot say? So there, like we talked about, there's a certain list of nutrients that they can use and a certain list that they can't. Anything that has been definitively proven for most people, they can typically use, and anything they can't, or anything that hasn't, they can't. So that's something I want you to look up. Which ones are they able to use and which ones are they not able to use? What does organic mean? Going back. Ooh, we're going far back. Now, 100% organic means all ingredients must be certified organic. Now, what does certified organic mean? It has to do all of these things. So there are certain standards that they have for every piece and part of the processing and growing and shipping. Everything that they do with that food has to follow certain guidelines. And it has to be produced in a way that protects natural resources, conserves biodiversity, and uses only approved substances. So that's really what organic means. Now, what does it not mean? What does natural mean? I kind of skipped over that one because I wanted your answer at the very end. What does natural mean? Just about nothing. It's not a regulated word, but generally it means it's produced without artificial colors, artificial preservatives, artificial flavors. It's done with minimal processing. That is generally the accepted definition for natural. It doesn't have to mean anything. You can put natural on anything. I also want to point out that there's a lot of natural products that aren't necessarily good for you. Hemlock is natural. It is also a poison. Natural does not necessarily mean it's a good thing. And really it has no regulation on any labels. There's a generally accepted guideline, but it is not, they're not going to get in trouble if they use natural and they weren't supposed to. What entity gave us the foods list that is best to eat organic? So it's that Dirty Dozen list. The Environmental Working Group, or the EWG. Now there are also other things that the Environmental Working Group did. They look at all kinds of things. They'll look at cosmetics and shampoo and soaps, and they'll see which ones are generally safe for us and our environment, which ones may need a little bit of work, which ingredients we really want to look for. So if you ever look at the Environmental Working Group website, is a great resource for looking at your foods. There was a point that I had A bunch of people look up their shampoos and their soaps and their makeup. It's a great place to look at them because they also give them ratings. So they'll give them a grade from A through F, whether it's a good thing that you're using it, or you may want to find a different product. So the environmental working group, that may be another one you want to look up. What is one reason to eat organic? Go back one more time so you can see the list. Now, again, these go back and forth. So decreasing the body's toxic load, decreasing the risk of chronic diseases like cancer, getting more nutrient-dense food, avoiding contaminated animal products, freshness factor, they're more likely to be fresh because they're going to go bad faster, and supporting sustainable farming. Now, going back to where we were, because my next question is, what is a reason to not eat organic? And I didn't go over that. So what are a couple reasons that you could have to not eat organic? One could be the cost. Or eating organic can be a lot more expensive. Another one could be, it may not be any better to eat some of the foods organic and some of them not. It may be exactly the same because there is no regulation for how far apart those farms have to be. The farm that you're looking at the grocery store may also not be following the rules. So it may not be worth the cost to eat organic. That can be something that you look up for your homework. So for your homework, I want you to blind taste test organic and conventional produce. So you can grab some from the store, the farmer's market, and I want you to blindfold yourself, and somebody can give you an organic one and then a conventional one. And I want you to see if you can taste the difference. Now, I also want you to find some research that either supports or opposes organic farming and write one paragraph summarizing that research. So like we talked about, that could be if they think that eating organic will put fewer pesticides and fewer yuckies in your system, or if it doesn't make a difference. If it isn't cost effective, if it really doesn't support sustainable farming, any of those things, you can look up anything for supporting or opposing organic farming. So I want you to really be able to look at the research yourself and see whether or not you think it is worth it to eat organic. Because there is some research on both sides, and it is completely understandable on both sides, whether it is cost effective and whether it's even worth it, whether it's worth it for the farmers or it's just more difficult to farmers, whether it's just this buzzword that we're using and doesn't really mean a whole lot. Could be anything. I'm completely open to all research that you got on it. Now, something I do want to mention for your research. When you're looking at something, I don't necessarily want a blog. I don't want an opinion piece. I want you to look at real, preferably peer-reviewed research. Google Scholar is a good place to start. I would like it to be at least from the last 5 years. If it has to be from the last 10 years, that's okay. I would prefer it from the last 5 years. So if you look on Google Scholar, that'll be a good place to start. And that way you can see the research too. Those are gonna be more difficult to read, but I want you to go through it and try to summarize it. If you need help, let me know, and I will help you. But find something that you're interested in. So it could be, does eating organic help you exercise better? Does it help you live longer? Does it help you look younger longer? Is it even worth it? If you care more about the environment, that's really what you want to focus on. Does organic farming help the environment, or does it hurt the environment more than conventional farming? Is it more cost effective? So if you're really looking more at budgeting, is organic farming more cost effective because it's going to save you from chronic diseases, or is it at an unnecessary added cost? So those are the things I want you to look at, and I want you to pay very close attention to your research. I don't really want it from blogs. I don't even really particularly want it from a government website unless you're looking at the regulations for organic farming. And I also want you to make sure you cite that research in your paper. So make sure you have your sources down. If you need help with citations, let me know. Citation Machine is a great place to do your citation. And I would prefer it in APA format, because that is what you're normally going to do for science research papers. So just so you get used to it now, go ahead and do your citation in APA format. And I am not going to make you write the entire citation yourself. I'm perfectly okay with you putting it into a citation generator. If you have any questions about doing the research or being able to write the paragraph or understanding the research, let me know, and let me know if you need any help. Again, let me know when is a good time for you to go over a review of the last, or it'll be 7 weeks next week. So we'll do a review of the last 7 weeks next week to make sure that we are completely ready for the midterm. And then we'll have the midterm the following week. So we'll have class next week, and then the following week I will send you a midterm to complete. And you'll be able to do that any point next week. Again, let me know if you have any questions. Good luck on your homework, and have fun taste testing your organic and conventional foods. Thank you all, and I will see you next week.